Welcome everyone, it's Matsimus. Thank you for joining me on today's video. First of all, I just want to apologise. Potentially my voice may sound a little rough right now. I do have a bit of a cold, so I do apologise, so bear with me. So today we are talking about the Japanese military's Type 10 main battle tank. Now, I will be in the future also doing a video on the Type 90 main battle tank, but I decided to do this one first because I, was kind of curious as to why these two tanks were created, considering the Type 90 is also a fairly impressive and formidable main battle tank for the Japanese army. So I decided to do this one first, and I'll relate back to the Type 90 here and there in this video too, to kind of cross-reference. So first of all, the Type 10, aka TKX, or aka the TKK, is the replacement of the Type 74, not the Type 90. As the Type 10 is a smaller vehicle than the Type 90, so it can fit on trains and is light enough to weigh under 50 tons. This allows it to be transported on roads by trucks and trains and such. This is achieved by the use of modular armour associated with the 4th generation armoured fighting vehicle. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to cross-reference a little bit with the Japanese Type 90 because it kind of makes sense as to why I'm talking about it in a little while here. So the Japanese Type 90 is a capable 3rd generation main battle tank. However, Japan is a cluster of nearly 7,000 islands, and about 70 to 80% of the country is actually forested. It has mountains, and it's really quite unsuitable for tanks, with its agricultural, industrial and residential use mainly taking priority for most of the free land that's available. Japan is one of the most densely populated countries in the world, which means space is at a very high premium, and there are limitations on the transportation network and actually training grounds for these particular vehicles. They are very narrow trains and road systems that can't cope with vehicles weighing over 50 tons. This has meant that the Type 90 has only been able to operate in the 2nd largest island, and the northernmost, Hokkaido. I think that's how you say it. The obsolete Type 74 has therefore remained in service and has been the principal main battle tank for the rest of Japan, with about 700 still in service as of 2006. The Japanese Type 10 main battle tank is there to offer improvements over the Type 90 in firepower, protection, mobility, and, but for the most important, strategic mobility, thanks to its modular construction, which can be adjusted to about 8 tons dependent on what requirements it's needed, and it will be able to meet the weight and dimensional requirements for transportation. Now this was really fascinating to me because you never really think about it when a country's vehicles are being deployed to training areas or around the infrastructure of a country. And for Japan it makes complete sense. I mean, as it's mentioned, that the infrastructure just isn't there to be able to deploy these kind of vehicles. Some of them are weighing up to 60 tons, 50 tons or so. That's a lot of weight for obviously Japan's roads, train systems to be able to take, and the country's just not really built around that kind of infrastructure. So it's really interesting to see how Japan has decided, we have this big old heavy Type 90 that really is only be able to be used in certain areas of the country. I mean, agriculture and the forested areas. I mean, we can see in this video just how thick and dense the forestry is in certain parts of the country, and clearly going to be very difficult to be able to get these tanks to train, to be able to, deploy to different areas of the country if, and hopefully never happens, came to some sort of armed conflict. So I guess Japan decided, well, we got a big problem here. We got, main battle tanks that are not able to be deployed very easily. The infrastructure is just not there to deploy these heavy vehicles. We need to figure something out. A well-protected, good maneuverability, mobility, and firepower tank that is able to be transported and is able to keep up to, the restrictions that the country has in terms of its environment and its terrain and infrastructure. So that was kind of a surprise to me, and I think that's one of the most important attributes of this tank, is, it's actually been modelled and designed for a specific purpose to be able to try and meet Japan's stringent environmental and infrastructural needs, which is pretty cool to hear about. Another name given to this tank is the Type 10 Hitomaru, and the development of this vehicle began basically in around the 1990s, and due to very slow pace of development, the first units were delivered to the army only in 2010. Even that means only a small amount of 13 units was ready at the time, and an additional order of 68 tanks was expected at the end of 2015. The initial price per unit was an estimated $6.5 million US, but at the end of the cost went up to a whole $11.3 million US per unit, which is very expensive, guys, which made it pretty expensive overall as a project. However, for that price, guys, it does feature some really remarkable characteristics, mainly in the field of communication and digitalized battlefield capabilities. Namely, this tank is fully capable of sharing the data from its sensors not only with other tanks but also with the infantry units working together with it. It increases its battlefield awareness to the level it is unprecedented even in modern Western armies. Now this is really important, guys, and I think something that we really need to start taking into consideration for armies all around the world is the infantry and the armoured corps, and I've mentioned this many times before, inherently work together as a brotherhood. Without that true communication, that true teamwork between armoured and infantry, it can be quite a difficult task in trying to create operational awareness and battlefield cohesion. So I think what Japan has decided is, because they are such a tight-knit country in quite a small environment, infantry and armour must work so closely together that it's super important to have this communication basis and the battlefield awareness a top priority. So clearly they've decided to make sure that the sensors and the data that they're communicating with different vehicles, different battle groups, are all able to communicate across the whole spectrum of the military, whether it be infantry, even air assets and such, which is really important even for battlefield commanders being able to coordinate their assets where they need them to go. And I think it's something that we may have dropped the ball a little bit, specifically in the UK, I can tell you that for sure. It's only as of recently where we're starting to sort of bring those sort of systems in place with the Ajax system, obviously being able to look through the sights of each different vehicle if they wish to, being able to share information, data very easily via the battlefield management systems they're starting to bring out now. So we're only starting to just catch up, and Japan has, I guess, got a little bit ahead of the ball game with that kind of technology. So let's get to the juicy stuff. The Type 10 Hitomaru has a Japanese manufactured L44 120mm main gun. It is able to fire pretty much all sorts of standard 120mm NATO standard shells, as well as the newly designed Saber rounds made specifically for this tank. It also uses an autoloader system, which is not too common for most NATO tanks, as you already know. Its armour has a very advanced ballistic shape, which allows for higher survivability than most of its NATO counterparts. Now this is quite subjective. You know, we know that Leopard 2 are starting to get their own specific upgrades. Challenger 2 really isn't progressing too much in terms of armour protection. We don't know too much about it as of right now. And clearly the M1A2, M1A3 program is on its way rolling with the SEP upgrades and such, so that's quite subjective to that kind of statement. The armour also introduces a new nanocrystal steel compound that no other tank has. I don't know what to tell you about that. I mean, steel is steel. Depending on how they create it, it's very difficult to say. Nanocrystal steel, I've never really heard of it. We all know Japanese steel is obviously very high quality, so I can probably assure you that the armour compounds that they're placing on this tank are going to be a very high quality. The armour that is associated with this 4th generation armoured fighting vehicle is modular, and therefore the armour boxes can be added and removed from the steel surfaces of the skin of the vehicle. The basic box works as a form of standoff armour that prematurely detonates the shape charge weapons, i.e. high explosive anti-tank, anti-tank missiles and such, stringing out the copper jet and reducing its effectiveness. The modules also mean that various ceramics and other tiles can be inserted in the modules and removed quite easily, allowing the operator to equip their vehicles with the appropriate level of protection for future threats and the environmental needs that it's adjusted for. It's these modules that are inserted with the ceramics that can weight the vehicle down, and by removing them and transporting them on a second vehicle, the Type 10 can weigh under the 50-ton limitations of the infrastructure of the country. The exact ceramic composition inserted into the modules of the composite armour is highly classified and pretty obvious. Though the vehicle does not have a hard anti-tank kill system, it does have a detection system which, when laser detonators which are used on more lethal tandem charge anti-tank missiles paint the vehicle, it can kind of prevent it or detect these positions and systems being put on place of the vehicle. This triggers the smoke grenade launchers to fire a screening grenade which deflects and scrambles the lasers so that the lock cannot be achieved and the missile potentially cannot be fired. Again, this is pretty normal for most tanks nowadays. We're starting to put those defensive measures in place to prevent us from being attacked from those awful anti-tank guided missiles that are being produced nowadays, and actually being able to knock out some of the most powerful tanks out there. So it's nice to see once again Japan is actually kind of relating to those systems and trying their best to create defenses to deter these kind of systems taking attack. The tank was specifically designed with asymmetric warfare in mind. A very large emphasis was placed on the protection against RPG rounds. The vehicle does have sloped modular ceramic armour, it is pretty similar to the Leopard 205, and the side profile is what I'd say quite similar to the Leclerc in all honesty really. The vehicle does comprise of a secondary armament consisting of a 7.62 machine gun coaxial mounted and the M2 12.7 machine gun on top of the vehicle for the commander. It may also have another 7.62 machine gun mounted for the commander station. However, for the most part, the M2 50 caliber machine gun is going to be a lot more effective for defending this vehicle for infantry support roles, air defense, all that sort of stuff. Another impressive feature of this tank is its hydropneumatic active suspension system, which allows it to move through some really rough terrain and ensures minimal recoil while firing. It also is able to adjust its suspension to be able to, increase muzzle elevation potentially, and basically to navigate terrain a little better in the tough environments that Japan has. You know, it's able to probably place better hold down positions and adjust its angle accordingly. Finally, it is quite light at 48 tons when full, and is an additional advantage on very soft terrain, muddy terrain, and you know, the more weight, the more spongy that soil is, the more it's going to sink and create a lot of tension for that engine to work on. The tank can sit, stand, kneel or lean in any direction. This feature gives it a number of advantages. Some tanks will actually be able to be fitted with a front-mounted dozer blade. The vehicle is powered by a V8 diesel engine developing around 1200 horsepower. This vehicle has a very lightweight and powerful engine, giving it an impressive power-to-weight ratio of 27 horsepower per ton. It is coupled with a continuously variable transmission, or CVT, and because of such transmissions, this main battle tank can go in reverse speed at the full 70 km/h stated on road. All in all then, this tank to me is very, very impressive. It has all the key attributes and features that a modern main battle tank today should have, and some extra ones too that, you know, aren't very common in most platforms nowadays. The suspension is one of those things where I'm kind of, you know, I don't think it's applicable for most countries. It's going to be specific to the country it's being utilised in. Obviously in Asian countries like South Korea and Japan, it may be more applicable and more specific to their environments. I personally think it's going to be a lot of extra money wasted on a tank for countries like the United Kingdom, the USA, Germany and such, because we just don't need those sort of systems. It would be nice to have, but in the day of modern defence budget cuts, if we can save on the suspension to make it do some really nice pimp my ride up and down left right tilts, I really don't think it's necessary, but, you know, Japan has decided differently. This tank is very expensive, and for that being the case, it's going to be producing probably quite small numbers, mostly due to its high price, but also obviously just due to the fact that terrain just isn't really suited for tanks in Japan. But it is really a fine addition to the Japanese army, and I think it's going to do very, very well for itself in the many years to come that it's obviously been designed for. Its modular protection is very cool. It's nice to see that they're obviously keeping up to date again with the electronic battlefield management system, and I think Japan's going to really enjoy this tank, and I hope you do too. I think it's an impressive vehicle, and yeah, I really do appreciate you guys watching. Please leave a like, and if you are new to my channel, please subscribe, and I'd love to hear your opinions on the tank. Let me know what you think. Like I said, I give it definitely a thumbs up and a positive opinion from my side. It'd be nice to see how it performs in terms of ranged engagements with that gun, and you know, how well their gunnery works for their country, and you know, if they're actually able to hit targets first time, all that good stuff, because it's not an environment where they can practice tank battlefield warfare very much, I'm sure, with the limited terrain they have. But thanks again guys, I really do appreciate you for watching. Have a great day, and bye bye.